It's great to be here, and I mentioned earlier that we're in the Royal River Community Playhouse. And it's weird, we were talking at the beginning that we needed to put wigs on some of these cameras, because if you know me, you know I'm used to loving to feed off an audience, to interact with you guys. And so I'm envisioning all of you out there, close to 200 watching, but it's a very different space. But the story of this space is the story of resiliency, is the story of innovation and collaboration. And the story of the space is that the Royal River Community Players moved in here just over a year ago, and then all of a sudden, 6 months ago, their work and their season had to be put on hold indefinitely. And our friends at Headlight AV were looking for a place to help folks like us do these types of events and keep marching forward. They took over the space, they transformed it, and part of the proceeds from every single client event like ours will go to help keep the Royal River Community Players alive and be able to deliver their programming again in the future. We're thrilled to be able to work with a community-minded partner like Headlight AV, who tries, and that's the key for all of us to try in our own small way, to live out these commitments to collaboration, to innovation, and to help each other move forward. So, how can Maine prosper again, and how can we do it together? I think that's the challenge that both Chanel and Lori has so clearly laid out already this morning. I've been saying this every time I've been in front of you for the past 5 years, that our economy requires both brutal honesty, or we won't be able to move ahead, and unquenchable optimism, or we won't dare to, as Lori said. And I have to say, there's been moments when my own optimism has been dimmed. But in the end, and I think you'll see in my remarks this morning, there's tremendous reason to believe that we can both support each other through what will be a hard slog of the next months and even maybe years. But on the other side, there are opportunities that Maine needs to continue to seize now and be in a position to really take advantage of as our history unfolds. So the data, it wouldn't be MDF without the data. This was the cliff that we fell off of, that we've all been feeling. That is the decline in jobs and employment in our state. And you can see that as we've bounced back due to gradual reopening, we're still very short of the low point of the previous Great Recession. And this situation has been so unique, and for me, one of the things that captures it the best about how the pandemic forces us to change our behavior fundamentally, you can see the decline in the vehicle miles that we all traveled. In March, down almost 50%. Still today, as things have gradually come back and as we've gotten used to taking these precautions, still down about 10% across our entire state. And yet, this was an unusual, deep, deep recession. This never happens. Building supply sales are one of the first things to go into the tank whenever we have a bad recession, and yet they've been up year over year. And I suspect July and August will show the same. Home sales have been up. Home prices have been up. And this is one of the reasons why earlier this week, CNN Business released a report that Maine was #1 in the nation in getting back to normal in terms of core economic activity. So it's important to celebrate a sense of perspective, but it's also important to recognize that that best in the nation back to normal still leaves us far, far short of the comeback that we need to orchestrate and engineer together. And we do always come back. That's the important thing to remember. These are the last 7 recessions that we've experienced here in our state. That long one that runs far out to the side of the screen was the very last recession from 2007. It usually takes us 3 to 4 years to get back to par. It took us 8 from the Great Recession. So we need to steel ourselves for this long, hard fight to restore economic opportunity to our friends and neighbors and businesses and communities. So what I want to do this morning is tie the challenge that Chanel and Lori already gave us and this massive challenge that we're living through economically to our own work here at MDF. How do we deploy our orientation to working with the trusted research, to developing leaders, which is so critical, and to forging and observing the creative partnerships that are working in order to move us forward. We're pursuing the vision that Lori still talks about today. I think that powerful vision of a high quality of life for all Maine people is the lens through which we put the data and is the lens through which we put the strategies that might drive us ahead. In 2018, we put out a platform based on that data called Making Maine Work. with the State Chamber and Educate Maine. And we called for certain specific actions to be taken, but we also called for the fact that we needed a truly comprehensive statewide economic plan, that we didn't have a guiding vision for action that could steer us for the decade to come. Luckily, Governor Mills and Commissioner Heather Johnson had that same vision. And as Lori said, they put together the group with input from thousands across the state to develop the 10-year economic plan that was rolled out only 9 months ago. It feels like years ago. And that plan really focused on trying to resolve and move solutions forward for 3 of these long-term data points that we've been struggling with the state. One is simple. How do we grow the wages of Maine people? And while we're growing them, how do we make sure that that growth is equitable and is shared equally across gender, race, region of our state? And what you can see here is not only how we lag the region and the country, but also how within our state, we've reported for a long time about the disparities by gender in measures of growth. And here, and you'll see in the upcoming report, an intention to put in front of us in stark terms, what are those disparities by race and ethnicity, so that we can begin grappling with that and moving forward on that gap. The 10-year plan wrestled with this, which is we can't pay each other more unless we generate more value from the goods and services that we produce per worker. And Maine has lagged. That bottom line on this chart is the state of Maine. And we have to be able to move that line up if we're going to prosper. And finally, we just don't have enough skilled working age people to drive this economy over the next decade. And we have to solve both that skills gap and that numbers gap for our state in increasingly creative ways. So the 10-year plan came out. It addressed what we've been talking about and highlighting in measures of growth for years now, and then this happened. We fell off that cliff. And then the challenge became somewhat different, as Lori said. The challenge became, how do we dust off what's still relevant, what's still powerful, and what's still germane about that 10-year plan and connect it to the dramatically changed circumstances. Some of it may be that the strategies and vision are right, and we're just going to have to start from a lower starting point or move a bit slower as resources allow. But some of it is we're going to have to reconceive what will move us furthest the fastest against talent, innovation, infrastructure, and equity. I'll talk the most this morning about talent and innovation. And all of those things, how do they feed into, again, that quality of life? Not each for their own sake of better roads or better broadband, but how do they support us achieving our true vision for Maine? So on the talent side, one of the pathways forward is the work that scores of organizations have come together on already over the last 3 years around Maine Spark. With this vision of moving our state to over 60% having a real credential of value beyond high school. It could be a degree, it could be an industry certificate, it could be short-term training that is on a pathway to meaningful lifelong learning. All of those things can count. We're in the low 50s today. We have to move tens of thousands of Mainers forward if we're going to create the kind of workforce we need. And our work here at MDF has focused on one of the most underattended aspects of this challenge over the years, which is our adult learners. We often refer to them as the non-traditional learners, even though they are going to become the plurality and then ultimately the majority of all the learners that we are trying to engage in post-high school education and training. These adults 25 to 64, and these are the 60,000 Mainers that lost their jobs between January and July. This work is needed now more than ever to meet not only the skills gap that was already there, but to meet the needs of tens of thousands of unemployed and underemployed Mainers. But don't just take my word for it. This data just came out this week from the national survey from an entity called Strata that says, yes, there are clearly challenges in terms of an ability to juggle the demands of life and survival while going back to school. But despite those challenges, twice as many folks say they are even more committed to trying to continue their educational opportunity during this time frame. Not surprisingly, 2/3 of them said they would be looking for something more immediate than a degree, something that they could pursue now in order to retain employment or get back to employment in the short term. Our obligation is to make sure that's a pathway forward and not a one-shot deal. And finally, there's no surprise. that the urgent demands of having a paycheck today, of staying safe, of being able to pay your rent and buy food, those are the preoccupations of today for many of these struggling adults. But finding a job and a career I love is still on the list. And I think the takeaway is we've got to support them now more than ever when life gets in the way and keeps them from those educational opportunities. And that, frankly, is what Maine Spark and Adult Promise are all about. Only a third of them say that they have the information and knowledge that they need in order to take advantage, identify and take advantage of these educational pathways. Only a third. So we know more than ever, quite literally, straight from the mouth of those who need it the most, that the resources of Adult Promise are more crucial than ever to get them on the right pathways, and the supports of the hundreds of navigators based in our community-based organizations and institutions across Maine are even more crucial than ever, so that they can get the supports they need to persist in that educational opportunity and succeed. We're committed to this work at MDF, despite the challenging environment, to attract the partners and investment to continue to sustain this and to serve these tens of thousands of needy Maine adults. So that's the skills gap issue. What about the quantity issue of just finding enough workers to drive this economy? Because make no mistake about it, while right now we have tens of thousands of underemployed and unemployed neighbors, that position is going to reverse itself again soon as we recover. And in some sectors, even now, that dilemma is still with us. Well, part of it is we are going to have to continue to attract a lot of would-be Mainers from everywhere else. And part of what's going to attract them is going to be the safety of the state and the quality of life of our state. We are the safest state in terms of crime in America, and the gap between us and the second 10 isn't even close. And now we know with our response to the pandemic that part of what is driving behavior that is keeping Maine's economy at a higher level than we would have been is the people who recognize this is the place they want to make their home now, or the place where they want to convert their second home into their permanent home. And that's because of the safety. We've got to invest in our communities more broadly and sustain them so that they can continue to contribute to this quality of life. We work with dozens of communities across Maine through the Maine Downtown Center. We have for over 20 years. And they are at the epicenter of this challenge of how do we help businesses stay alive, how do we help community members help each other. This Kurt Hahn quote, "We are crew, not passengers," I love that from our folks at the heart of Biddeford. And so collaborative leadership looks different, but it still needs to be the driver that sustains these communities moving forward. Some is the short-term relief to help these businesses, many of whom tell us they had a 1 to 6 month horizon to be able to survive through this. So efforts in terms of immediate relief that the downtowns across Maine have worked to deploy. And some of it is finding the silver lining of opportunity, where about a third of our businesses say they've seen an explosion in online sales in response to how they adapt in the pandemic. Maine Grains and Skowhegan, 4,000% increase in online sales. Are you serious? How is that even possible? Good on you, Amber. So our communities are reimagining themselves and supporting each other in ways large and small. Some of it is the simple things like the drive-up shopping and the outdoor dining. Some of it is more creative things like the pop-up drive-in theater that you see here. Through all that, the Maine Downtown Center is doing our part to bring communities together, to inspire each other with creativity and innovation. And we're actually working with our friends at Volunteer Maine to deploy 5 Main Street Fellows out into these communities to keep helping them do this good work. Finally, we've learned from watching our communities that the intentionality with which we do this work, that we bring to the passion that we have for this and the emotional bond is as important as the substance of the initiatives. It's the love for these communities that will power us forward. All that said, I don't think in the end talent and quality of place will be enough. In the end, innovation will be the crucial thing that will be necessary to really jumpstart this economy and keep it moving forward. Why do I think that? Because the density of innovation more than anything else will drive the future. And when we've gone through other events in the past, whether it's 9/11, whether it's natural disasters, whether it's economic disruption, we haven't seen the step change we hoped for, the game changers that we hoped for Maine. And I think the reason is because we didn't have the density of innovation to take advantage. We have to change this picture where Maine is the bottom line, the laggard, in terms of our relative investment in R&D. Think about, in the near term, think about how our response to the pandemic would have been radically different if we did not have these innovation-intensive, best-in-class, global leading companies headquartered here in our state, who are able to produce the know-how to guide us, to produce the testing equipment and methodologies, to put literally tens of thousands of tests in the hands of frontline Maine workers. We couldn't have done it if these companies weren't global leaders in innovation, and we couldn't have done it if they weren't headquartered here. In the 10-year economic plan, there's a focus on this question of how do we take advantage of these cross-cutting thematic clusters of activity, some in technical services and manufacturing, like the great companies I just mentioned, but it's where those things overlap to our historic assets and strengths in forest products and in food systems and marine resources. And we are moving forward as a state. Taking advantage of the fact that Maine has the most forested area in the United States, and taking advantage that we are the most sustainably managed of any state in the nation. Because the fact is that anything that can be made from fossil fuels today can be made from wood fiber tomorrow. And the way we're going to drive that vision forward is by the collaboration of many different players, many different entities, from industry, research, government, and community. The cross-sector collaboration that is the hallmark of how we do business here at MDF. This work has not stopped. Shortly after we left last year's annual meeting, Maine unveiled the world's largest 3D printer and the world's largest 3D printed object. Why? Because we want to print those objects with composite material made from Maine wood fiber. We're moving forward on taking stock around the globe, because this is a global competition, in all those innovative over-the-horizon products. Who is winning? How are they winning? And how do we attract that investment to Maine? And we're going to stay after attracting that investment regardless of the pandemic and regardless of the recession. This is the virtual trade mission that our friends at the Maine International Trade Center organized back in August. And you can see their side piping in from Finland and our side piping in from Maine. We need to continue this dialogue, because if we can move forward, even while others are standing still or moving backwards, we can seize this incredible innovative opportunity. The community support has to match the innovation in the industry. So working with our community partners and deploying over $1 million in funding so that these communities can begin the process of cleaning up, re-envisioning, and reusing these idled industrial mill sites is crucial. It all has to come together. I'm excited to tell you today that this year a parallel group launched that is working on the exact same type of exciting collaborative opportunity set in our marine industries across the state. And you can see on the screen the vast array of partners and more that are coming together to make this possible. So whether it's offshore aquaculture, whether it's land-based aquaculture, whether it's kelp, whether it's lobsters, and whether it's many creative uses for the byproducts of those things, we are seizing opportunity and moving forward, pandemic or no, recession or no. Finally, none of this is possible without thinking hard about who leads and how. I won't repeat all of what Lori said, because she really said it already, that everything about this is about leadership. We can't deliver our flagship programs like Institute for Civic Leadership or Leadership Maine. We can't get on that bus in these times. And indeed, on March 13th, the day that the first cases were announced in Maine for COVID, we were supposed to be doing this. And instead, we had to begin the incredibly rapid pivot to continuing to work with our leaders and aspiring leaders this way instead. So we're adapting. The other challenge for us is the challenge that Chanel laid out this morning, that if we are going to succeed in moving forward, the face of leadership and the how of leadership in this state has to look more diverse and more inclusive than it ever has before in our history. We can do this, and MDF is committed to playing our small part in helping to make it happen. So we launched as Al Raymond alluded to earlier this morning, we're launching a whole slate of programming to replace what we couldn't do. And we're calling it Lead Now. We have to respond to the imperative of the moment. And one of our board members said, this isn't about surviving the moment. This is about seizing it. And so we're delivering an array, everything from leading through uncertain times, to innovation in driving Maine's economy forward, to working through advancing equity and understanding difference. It'll be part of this slate of Lead Now. I'll flash up the email address. The website is still being built as we speak. That's how nimble we're all being in this environment. And we hope that it will help you as a leader lead now and move forward. Finally, winter is coming. I'm an optimist. I'm not a pessimist, but it's important that we all be realists. And I mean winter is coming literally. The next few months are going to be so hard for many of our businesses, communities, and neighbors. But I also mean it will take us probably a couple of years to get to the other side if this is like any other recession and this one's deeper. So what do you do when winter is coming? For one thing, you huddle together. You congregate for warmth. We have to stick together through these times, even more than we have in these first 6 months. It will get harder. And the second thing is, you don't eat this. What is this? It's your seed corn. Because no matter what the urgencies of the moment, you might get one satisfying meal out of this, but you lose the ability to plant the crop of next year, and you literally will starve in the future. And so we do have to take care of the demands and urgencies of the moment, but we have to keep planting the seeds of the future. And that is part of what I call on this group watching and our 2,000 alumni to constantly remind us of and to keep us on track with that careful balance. We can never forget who's on the other end of that rope. When you're up there as a leader or just as an everyday Maine citizen, there's someone at the other end of that rope that you are counting on for support, that you are counting on to hold you up. We need to take turns on the high wire. We need to give ourselves permission as a leader when we need a break from being in that spot. But none of us can take a break from being on belay, from being at the other end of the rope during the next months and the next years to come. Because we will get to the other side of it, and the flowers will come through the snow. And some of them are already apparent to all of us. But they won't come through the snow if we don't stick together, if we don't support each other, and if we don't continue to plant the seeds for the future. That's what will get us to our true end vision. So like Lori did, I call on all of you to do what you've always done. You're leading today. We need you to lead now, and we need to support you in every way in being those leaders in the coming months and years. Join MDF, support each other. Please, lead now.